Okay, language is often talked about along with cognition, whether language is distinct from cognition or whether it's a form of cognition. That's probably an arbitrary distinction that we make between the two. Um, but language learning is one of the most important things that occurs in the first 2 years of life, um, and it, it's learned simply through listening, essentially. There is a particular type of speech that I think we all tend to use. Sometimes it's called motherese, but really baby talk might be more appropriate because it's not just mothers that use it. This is child-directed speech, really. It's the high-pitched, simplified, and repetitive way that adults speak to infants. I found myself doing this with my nephew when he was you know, less than 2 years old. In the first few months of life, I think we all find ourselves talking that way to infants. With this high pitched, simplified way. Trying to get them to understand what we're saying to them, and not getting a response that would indicate that one way or another from them. Um, some of the first attempts that we can characterize by infants to express themselves occur in the form of babbling. Cooing precedes babbling. Cooing is the making of these individual sounds, whereas babbling involves the extended repetition of certain syllables. So, for instance, ba ba ba. That begins when babies are between 6 and 9 months old, and then eventually by about one, that's when you start to hear the first full words being used. Um, you see a naming explosion. This is a sudden increase in an infant's vocabulary, especially in the number of nouns. That begins at about 18 months of age. From that point on, they really start picking up words very quickly. So as I said, it's at about 1 year old that you start to hear infants speaking their first few words. Although this spoken vocabulary increases gradually, about one or two new words a week, until they hit um, that point at which they really just start exploding in terms of their vocabulary. They pick up words very quickly. Once again, I think about my nephew. Uh, when he was picking up words, it's like you have to be very careful what you say around them, because if you say something, you're going to hear it again later. That's how easy it is. Usually, just one time is sufficient for it to stick. And of course, it'll always be those words that you don't necessarily want to stick that do end up sticking. So once spoken vocabulary reaches about 50 words, it builds quickly at a rate of 50 to 100 words per month. There are some cultural differences in language use, but there's also a lot of universals in terms of language. A hollow phrase, this is a single word that is used to express a complete, meaningful thought. All new talkers say the names and utter hollow phrases. So, for instance, milk, is a hollow phrase to express uh, the thought that an infant wants milk. Or mom might express that the infant is looking for mom, or wants mom. But you do see infants differ in their use of various parts of speech, depending on the language that they are learning. For example, you tend to hear infants picking up more nouns in North America, in English, and fewer verbs, whereas you see the opposite in Asian languages. You tend to see them pick up fewer nouns and more verbs. Um, Infants also acquire grammar, which is what allows them to put these words together into meaningful sentences and express themselves. So, moving on from that idea that one word can communicate a thought, eventually they'll start stringing words together with in the appropriate sequence, using prefixes and suffixes, changing their intonation, loudness, using different verb forms, pronouns, negations, prepositions, and articles. Obviously, these things will not come in the first 2 years necessarily, but there will be a gradual increase in their ability to use grammar. Worldwide, people who are not yet 2 years old, they're already using language pretty well. And so that again, it seems to be just picked up quite naturally, which is also why we mentioned language development as an example of a critical or sensitive period, because infants seem to be very well suited to picking up language in the first couple of years of life. There have been a few different hypotheses about language development. One of the biggest ones was Skinner's behaviorist model or learning approach. Skinner thought that infants needed to be taught language in order to learn it, and furthermore, he said that infants would learn language no differently than they learn anything else, primarily through the process of reinforcement and punishment. He said that spontaneous babbling is usually reinforced, and then it'll no longer be reinforced until you start to hear full words, and then reinforcement of full words eventually stops until you start to get strings of words, and then after that, that stops getting reinforced until you start getting full sentences being reinforced, etc., etc. Skinner said that parents are expert teachers, and other caregivers help them to teach children how to speak. That frequent repetition of words is instructive, especially when words are linked to the pleasures of daily life, and that well-taught infants become well-spoken children. These are the different components of the learning approach to language development. Although there were lots of problems with the learning approach. And Noam Chomsky was a linguist, not so much a psychologist, more of a linguist. He specialized in studying language. He used the term language acquisition device to explain his argument that language learning is really innate, that it's not learned, but again, it develops naturally. It's an innate thing. It doesn't have to be learned. And he said that this language acquisition device is a mental structure that enables humans to learn language, including the basic aspects of grammar, vocabulary, and intonation. So, to go back to Skinner's model, one of the things that Chomsky criticized Skinner for was that certain things children say are clearly not reinforced by parents. You don't hear many parents saying, "We goad to the car," although you might hear a child say that. Okay, so they didn't learn from a parent to say goad, but they sort of took their knowledge that you add an ed onto things, and you add that onto a word that means that we're moving somewhere, go, and that's how you get goad. And Chomsky said that was pretty dramatic evidence to suggest that it's not about learning, but more so about this innate device that we all have inside of our brains that allows us to do those sorts of things. There's also a social impulse toward communicating. Infants communicate in every way they can because humans are social beings and dependent on one another for survival, for well-being, and joy. Most of our language that we utilize on a day-to-day basis is not just for communicating information, but sometimes just for chit-chat. The first thing that you usually say to someone when you see them is, "Hey, how are you?" Right? So that's sort of a phrase that's used for social purposes, and it's also very important for the way that languages develop in infants.